Okay, sorry, someone called me and they ruined my video. So here's the rest of chapter 11. But really setting the scene so that you, the reader, can connect with a familiar experience, right? An author uses imagery, appeal to sound, touch, taste, see, smell, in order to establish a connection, make a moment relatable to the reader. So really reinforcing the fact that the Igbo people used oral tradition as their storytelling method, right? And the way of passing on their history and teaching children, and, you know, emphasizing that this is a universal experience, right? Your parent reading a bedtime story to you. So this is their nightly routine, kind of, right? Setting up the scene. And then it says it was Ekwefe's turn to tell a story and talking about a tortoise. And this is a story that you can probably identify with, like the tortoise and the hare, familiar, relatable characters. But this is a story about kind of deception or trickery, kind of like Little Red Riding Hood, and the consequences of that. So there's a tortoise and he wants to go and he wants to travel with the birds because there's a famine and he hasn't eaten. So the birds are weary of the tortoise coming with them to travel. And it says that the birds say, "We know you too well," said the birds when they had heard him. "You are full of cunning and you are ungrateful. If we allow you to come with us, you will soon be your mischief. You will soon begin your mischief." So like, we've been burned by you before. You are, we don't trust you. And the tortoise said, "You do not know me. I am a changed man. I have learned that a man who makes trouble for others is also making it for himself." So the birds kind of agree and they're weary, but they allow him to go. And the tortoise is sly. He's tricky. And he tells the birds that, it's customary for when you go visit someone else, you kind of change your name. And the birds, it says, none of the birds had heard of this custom, but they knew that the tortoise, in spite of his failings in other directions, was a widely traveled man who knew customs of different peoples. So they believe him. And they kind of changed their names. And the tortoise, he was asked to be called All of You. That's what he wants his name to be, All of You. So they go and they find this place and they are hosted by guests, and they're presented with the most delicate meal that they've, could ever have. It's a feast for kings. And when they arrive, it says, "But the tortoise jumped to his feet and asked, 'For whom you have prepared this feast?' And the man says, 'For all of you.'" So if you remember, the tortoise had changed his name to All of You. So the tortoise says, "You remember that my name is All of You. The custom here is to serve the spokesman first and the others later." So the tortoise is really tricky and he can't fly, but he used the birds to travel to this place where he knew that the hosts were going to say that the meal was for all of them. So he tricks the birds to so that he can have a meal. And the birds don't like that. And there is, there's issues that arrive and and the ending of the story. So we see here that the story serves to give meaning to the way of the world around the Igbo people, talking about like, why is a tortoise's shell so lumpy and bumpy, right? Well, it's because this legend or this proverb or this story of the tortoise. It says, how does that come to be? "Tortoise looked down from the sky and saw his wife bringing things out. It was too far to see. When all seemed ready, he let himself go. He fell and fell and fell until he began to fear he would never stop falling. And then the sound of the cannon crashed on the compound. Did he die? No. His shell broke into pieces, but there was a great medicine man in the neighborhood The tortoise's wife sent for him, and he gathered all the bits of shell and stuck them together. That is why a tortoise's shell is not smooth. So when you think about a turtle, like the way that we know a turtle, right? Their shells are lumpy and bumpy and looked like little pieces built together. So on my little sticky note here, it says, the tortoise story emphasizes the importance of names within the Igbo culture and the way that, appearances are not always reality, or, names are important here. And stories explain the world around them with the way that a tortoise's shell looks. And the telling of stories between mother and child is a universal experience. So just again, kind of a relatable moment, a way that we can connect to this culture that may seem so different from ours, but how it's all kind of related in the end. So they're finishing the stories, and it's Zenma's turn to tell a story. And it says that she's starting, but she broke off because at that very moment, a loud and high-pitched voice broke the outer silence of the night. It was Chilo, the priestess of Egbala, prophesying. So remember, Chilo is the vessel. She is the human vessel that communicates the messages, the demands, the commands of Egbala, the Igbo people's, God that determines their actions and what they should do. And so Chilo is relaying some sort of prophecy that's being delivered to her by Egbala. But what's interesting here is it says, but tonight she was addressing her prophecy and greetings to Okonkwo. And so everyone in his family listened. The folk story stopped. So she's prophesizing something that has to do with someone in Okonkwo's family. And it says, at the mention of Azenma's name, Akwefe jerked her head sharply like an animal that had sniffed death in the air. Like, why is Egbala wanting to talk to Azenma? I thought this was over. I thought she was a normal child. We went through the destroying of the rock. Like, she shouldn't have anything to do with spirituality. Like, and what just happened with Ikemefune. Like, why is she being summoned? Why do they want anything to do with her? It says her heart jumped painfully within her. It says the priestess had now reached Okonkwo's compound, and she said that Egbala wanted to see his daughter. And another thing here, I thought Okonkwo's reaction and the way that it's described to her is interesting. It says Okonkwo pleaded with her to come back in the morning because Azenma is now asleep. Do we see Okonkwo pleading for anything else and anywhere in the novel? Or is that, indicative of his special relationship that he has with Azenma? So Okonkwo is still pleading that the girl had been ill of late and was asleep. But here we see evidence that once their religion demands something, once Egbala demands something, or Chilo, or an elder, or something like that is demanded, they cannot refuse. It is, it becomes fated. It must be. They must follow the demands and commands and, guidance of their spiritual leader and creator. So Chilo kind of refuses. It says, the priestess screamed, beware, Okonkwo, she warned, beware of exchanging words with Egbala. Does a man speak when God speaks? Beware. So very passionate, very direct, very stern. And so Akwefe, is trying to keep Azenma from going. And she says that, fine, like, I'll let Azenma go with you, travel to you with the sacred house in the hills and the caves, but I will come with you too. She says this firmly. She wants to go. She wants to protect her daughter. She wants to make sure that she's okay. And Chilo has a very visceral reaction. She curses her and she says, how dare you, woman, to go before the mighty Egbala of your own accord? This is something that I am only permitted to do. This is my role. This is my honor. Beware, woman, lest he strike you in his anger. Bring me my daughter. And demands that Akwefe bring her Azenma. And Chilo says, come, my daughter. I shall carry you on my back. A baby on its mother's back does not know the way is long. So she's going to carry Azimah with her on her back. And we see Azimah is afraid. She's 10 years old. She's a little baby. And she says, Azimah began to cry. She was used to Chilo calling her my daughter. But there was a different Chilo she now saw in the yellow half-light. So Chilo is kind of exhibiting these supernatural qualities here, right? She's an old woman. She's an old widow. But she's going to carry Azimah on her back, which is incredibly strenuous. She's kind of filled with this like superhuman strength. And something about her seems different. She is the vessel in which a spirit is inhabiting her body to follow this command of Igbala. And we see, a lot of emotion here from Akwefe. She's trying to protect her daughter, make sure that she's okay. She says, don't cry, my daughter. Don't cry. She will bring you back soon. I will give you some fish to eat, kind of trying to soothe her. And then she says, don't be afraid, said Akwefe, stroking her head. And then Chilo kind of takes off with her on her back, and it says, Azimah was crying loudly now, calling on her mother. The two voices disappeared into the thick darkness. And then Akwefe's reaction, a strange and sudden weakness descended on Akwefe as she stood gazing in the direction of the voices, like a hen whose only chick had been carried away by a kite. So she feels devastated. She feels scared. She feels worried. Like, you think about everything that Akwefe has been through to have this one child, and, the special relationship that they have and the way that their relationship has kind of been described here. You can imagine the level of fear and devastation that Akwefe is feeling, not knowing what's going to happen to her daughter. And what this family has just been through with Ikemefune, right? So it says, Nwoye's mother tries to console her, and it says, but Akwefe did not hear these consolations. She stood for a while and then all of a sudden made up her mind. She hurried through Okonkwo's hut and went outside. Where are you going? He asked. I'm following Chilo, she replied, and disappeared in the darkness. Okonkwo cleared his throat and brought out his snuff bottle from the goatskin bag by his side. So she's directly defying the orders of Chilo. And Okonkwo doesn't try to stop her. So you then can kind of make inferences as to his relationship with her, but we continue to see Akwefe's will and the strength of her will and her defiance here, but it's important to know her intention and her mindset and what is motivating her. Has a mindset to protect her daughter, right? And what I urge you, and what I think is a fascinating comparison, is to compare Akwefe's actions here. They're similar in that she's defying, the orders of their spiritual God, but what is her intention and what does she want in comparison to Okonkwo's defiance of their spiritual God, and his intention and his motivation and what he wants. So this description of her following Chilo, right? And Chilo is demonstrating this supernatural strength. She's carrying Azimah through this very, very difficult terrain and this very difficult trek, but she's able to do it. It's very straining and very hard on Akwefe. She doesn't know how she's going to have the physical strength to carry on, right? But here, kind of summary, we see Akwefe fighting fate with her strong will. She is determined, she's devoted, she's committed unconditionally to her child, right? So her attempt to kind of fight what is fated, what is stated must happen by a spiritual leader. She tries to fight that. So we see her internal conflict, right? Chilo kind of thinks that somebody's following her. And talking about Akwefe, it says, one mind said to her, woman, go home before Igbala does you harm. But she could not. She stood until Chilo had increased the distance between them, and she began to follow again. She had already walked so long that she began to feel a slight numbness in the limbs and in the head. And then it occurred to her that they could not have been heading for the cave. They must have bypassed it long ago. They must be going towards Umanchi, the farthest village in the clan. Chilo's voice now came after long intervals. So they're going like on this roundabout way to the sacred cave, to the shrine of the hills and the caves. And no matter the, physical pain that Ekwefe is feeling, or the taxing kind of toll that this journey is taking on her, she's determined, no matter what her body is feeling. It says it was unbelievable the distance they had covered. So really speaking to the level of devotion, or the power of a mother's love, or the motivation that a mother can have to protect their child here. So it was a long and weary journey. Ekwefe felt like a sleepwalker most of the way. At one stage, Ekwefe was so afraid that she nearly called out to Chilo for companionship and human sympathy, really emphasizing just the, pain that she's feeling. And it says that Chilo is really embodying the spirit of their ancestors, of Igbala. She's chanting. It talks about it being possessed chanting. There was no humanity there. It was not the same Chilo who sat with her in the market and sometimes bought bean cakes for Zenma, whom she called her daughter. It was a different woman, the priestess of Igbala, the oracle of the hills and the caves. So she's really taken form of her being the human body vessel to communicate the spirit. And then they're going towards the cave, the mouth of the cave, the oracle of the hills and the caves, right? It says, from then on, Chilo never ceased chanting. She greeted her God in a multitude of names, the owner of the future, the messenger of the earth, the God who cut a man down when his life was sweetest to him. So it's kind of hinting like, is this, what kind of spirit is this? And, what kind of thing is looming here? So, it says that they meet the shrine of a great God. Ekwefe picked Zenma up. She was already beginning to doubt the wisdom of her coming. And then they go to the caves, and if anything happened to her, could she stop it? Talking about Ekwefe, how she's feeling. It says she would not dare enter the cave. Her coming was quite useless, she thought. All these things went to her mind, and she did not realize how close they were to the cave's mouth. And so when the priestess with the Zenma on her back disappeared through a hole hardly big enough to pass a hen, Ekwefe broke into a run as though to stop them. She stood gazing at the circular darkness which had swallowed them. Tears gushed from her eyes, and she swore within her that if she heard a Zenma cry, she would rush to the cave to defend her against all the gods in the world. She would die with her. So I really think that speaks to the level of commitment, of passion, of, maternal drive that Ekwefe feels, her strong will. She's willing to do anything to protect her daughter here. And speaks to, a mother's commitment. And then, you can compare this with Okonkwo's journey with Ikemefune and his reaction as a parent. And of course you can consider, it's not his biological child. Okonkwo does not feel necessarily the degree of desperation that Ekwefe does after all of the loss that she suffered. But Okonkwo suffered those losses as well, right? They're his children that Ekwefe lost. And what feelings does he have in regard to that? One could think on one hand, shouldn't children hold a more sacred place in Okonkwo's life too? Even though he didn't carry the child, he still lost the child. So, and then surprisingly at the end, Ekwefe's waiting for them to come out, and she hears something behind her, and it says, a man stood there with a machete in his hand. Ekwefe uttered a scream and sprang to her feet. And it happens to be Okonkwo. It says, don't be foolish, said Okonkwo's voice. I thought you were going into the shrine with Chilo, he mocked. Ekwefe did not answer. Tears of gratitude filled her eyes. She knew her daughter was safe. So she feels this sense of security, this sense of comfort, protection from Okonkwo, even though he's being, snarky and sassy like he usually is. This is, he's there for her. He's supporting her. So I wrote maybe a new side of Okonkwo. So interesting.